Hello, everybody, and welcome back to In Good Spirits, the podcast where we pour a dram, dive into the stories and science and soul of the whiskey world, talk about whiskey investments, more importantly, and my opinion on it and what's going on in it. My name's Thomas Ballantine, and I'll be talking all things American today, which for me, I've just got to touch on slightly as I apologise for the delay in releasing this episode. I have been in the United States for a few weeks, and I was meant to record this before I went, and then I didn't record it, and now a few weeks have passed, and now it's been a full month since the last show. So I know a lot of people have been asking, and I'm sorry about that. I've just been enjoying myself across the pond, enjoying myself, sampling all things American, soaking in the culture, and enjoying the hot weather that we've just had out there. And drank a bit more than I should care to admit. So if you would like to grab a glass, preferably with a little bit of sunshine in it, and let's talk all things American today, and all things American whiskey, more specific, and tip our hats to what that entails. So let's start at the very top. What is an American whiskey? Well, like Scotch or Irish whiskey, it's a spirit distilled from grain and aged in barrels, but it's in the US. So, as the name American suggests, it's probably made in that country. But there's a bit more variation to it, and there's a little bit more nuances, similar to when you get blended Scotch or single malt, etc. Something I've broke down in one of my very first episodes, if you guys would like to learn all about that. Each of it has its own intricacies for American whiskey, but as a general rule, it must be made in the US, aged in new charred oak barrels, distilled at less than 80% ABV, and the grain recipe is normally corn, but there could be it could be rye or grain or other things for it to be called an American whiskey. Now, let's get to a little bit more precision and detail about American whiskey. So you've probably seen the words straight, Kentucky, and American whiskey. So they all have slight different nuances to them, and they mean slightly different things, and they mean different characteristics for the whiskey could be coming through. So American whiskey is just an umbrella term. It covers any whiskey made in the United States. That includes bourbon, rye, Tennessee, Kentucky, wheat. List goes on. Made in America, American whiskey. And so as long as it's distilled in the US, it's under this category. It's almost just like saying Scotch is just made in Scotland, or a European wine's made in Europe. It's just basically, if it's made there, that's what it's called. Or I guess the good one for comparing it to wine is more champagne, right? It has to be made in the particular region. Champagne, otherwise it's just a bubbly spirit or whatever the equivalent champagne name is called. But then Kentucky whiskey, that's where we're starting to get a little bit more specific. So legally, this has to be made in Kentucky. It must be produced and aged in Kentucky, and that's pretty much it, really. It's just like a Scotch has to be made in Scotland, and American has to be made in America. Kentucky has to be made in Kentucky. Why is it got its own unique name? Well, Kentucky has its own unique climate, so ages whiskey a bit faster, so it has a bit more of a unique flavour. Originally, an American whiskey had to be made in Kentucky or Tennessee. They've expanded that to now the whole of America. But there's a lot more kind of culture and history of distilling in the region, so they've still wanted to kind of differentiate themselves. So they, wanted to protect their kind of own brand to say, we're not just an American whiskey, we're Kentucky whiskey. It's a little bit more of a showpiece thing and a bit more of a pride thing for them. And then there's straight whiskey. So this one is more about the quality and the aging. To be called a straight whiskey, you must be aged at least 2 years in new charred oak barrels, has no additives, and if it's aged less than 4 years, it must state the age as well. I think so. So minimum 2 years, but if it's less than 4, you also have to state the age. So you'll see on bottles that might say straight bourbon whiskey or straight rye whiskey. It's essentially a guarantee of authenticity, but also a guarantee of minimum age and requirements like that. So you're not just getting something that's made yesterday and calling it a straight whiskey. It's meant to kind of signify a little bit more quality in the spirit. But then here's then a fun phrase. So, when I'm talking about barrels and we say I'm buying a hogshead sherry butt, style of cask or Speyside cask or Islay sherry butt, etc., etc. They all have particular names to it, but now we break down this full name of Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Well, Kentucky, made in Kentucky. Straight, has the minimum 2 years. Bourbon, then it's made with its own particular style. And then whiskey, right? So it's just a whiskey. So Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey could be a phrase that you see. And this it's made in Kentucky and all that fun stuff. So you got American whiskey, you got Kentucky whiskey, you've got Tennessee whiskey, you've got straight whiskey, etc., etc. So let's touch a bit more on bourbon, and that's typically the name most people think about when thinking of American whiskey. People think, American whiskey must be a bourbon. Other way around. All bourbons are American whiskeys, but not all American whiskeys are bourbon. So for it to be called legally a bourbon, it must be made in the US, not just Kentucky. They've expanded that now. Has to have at least 51% corn. So it can't be more a rye whiskey in there than 51%. Still has to be mainly made up of corn. Aged in new charred oak barrels. So it can't be refills that you take for granted in the Scotch industry. Distilled at no more 160 proof. So for my non-American viewers, that's basically 80% ABV. A proof is basically double of ABV. And then when it enters the barrel after its distillation, it can't be higher than 125 proof. And then once it's bottled, it must be no less than 80 proof. So if you kind of equivalent that to, your European or Scotch whiskey world lovers, 40 proof or 40, ABV is that 80 proof mark. And we know from the Scotch whiskey laws and the Scotch whiskey world, if it's not 40% ABV, then you can't call it a whiskey. It's like an aged spirit at that point. So bourbon has those very particular characteristics for it to be called a bourbon. And then on top of that, you've got the name. So Kentucky and straight. So you might just have a bourbon, you might just have a straight whiskey, you might have a Kentucky straight bourbon, etc., etc. But this is something that you really got to read the labels for, and you've got to really look at what they're saying on it. So a great example is Jack Daniel's. Everybody thinks it's a bourbon. Nowhere on the bottle does it say it's a bourbon. That's because they do charcoal filtering of their whiskey. For more info on that, please use Google and kind of go on their website to talk about the exact process of how they do it. I'm not an expert about how they do it. I just know that that's a process that they do. So that charcoal filtering then excludes it from being a bourbon, but it's still an American whiskey. But this one's made in Tennessee, so they call it a Tennessee whiskey. So if you have a look at Jack Daniel's bottle, it will normally say Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey. So when you talk about the number one selling bourbon in the world, it's more Jim Beam. So Jim Beam follows those bourbon laws and those bourbon kind of profile, and then they're the number one seller in the world for that spirit. So always look out for those on all the bottles, because just saying single malt in the UK or in Scotland doesn't really give you an indication of where it's made or where it's from or some other kind of quality to it. We use kind of the age ranking system, 10, 12, 15, 18. But Americans, their whiskey tends to be younger in general, tends to mature a lot quicker, it tends to have a lot more flavour and intensity, just because of the climate's a lot different and a lot more, I would say, fluctuating than Scotland. Scotland tends to be nice and mellow. We do have our seasons, but it's not as kind of too hot in the summer and it's not too cold in the winter. But where is the bourbon name from? So a little bit of a fun fact down memory lane. So the main theory, so there are two theories that are doing to it, but I think the main one that everybody hears about is the one of Bourbon Street in New Orleans. So where people would then make the bourbon in Bourbon County in Kentucky, where people think that's the original story. They would ship that down the Mississippi, down to New Orleans, down a street called Bourbon Street in New Orleans, a major port, and basically everybody would go to Bourbon Street to drink whiskey. And so when you say, do you want a bourbon, you kind of would say, oh, what they mean by that is we'll go to Bourbon Street where all the whiskey is, where it's made from. And then the name just kind of stuck around the rest of America because that was the place to go for a good whiskey. And it was Bourbon Street. And then, it's just become quintessential American as, I don't know, apple pie. I don't know if that's the most quintessential American thing, food out there, but that's just the thing that comes to mind. Or waffles for breakfast or something like that. I guess that's the other one I would think of off the top of my head. Having just been there, I had quite a few waffles for breakfast, so definitely think that's an American trait more than a UK trait from my point of view. So, changing gears and kind of thinking about what this kind of show normally talks about in terms of the investment side of whiskey and what bourbon can bring to the table. It's actually really, really interesting now, American whiskey and the American market and bourbon in general, not just for themselves, but around the world. And so if you're enjoying a good whiskey or if you're enjoying a good bourbon, this is going to be relevant for you. There's going to be lots of interest now for people wanting to buy your whiskies. And it's down to many things, really. And I'll touch on those in a second, but just to kind of throw some stats from some research from the US whiskey industry. Whiskey sales in the last year, in 2023, 2024, surpassed over 5 billion in just the US alone. And then if you add global exports on top of that, that's another $1.3 billion. Key markets for them are UK, Germany, Japan, now India, and now you're starting to get some in China, but that's still a market to kind of go after. And it's not slowing down for the Americans at all. Analysts are projecting the American whiskey to grow at an average of 6% CAGR. So that's compound annual growth rate per year, all the way through to 2030. So if you have a compounded growth every year now for the next 5 years, you can really see how American whiskey is going to be a bit of a thing. And as we know from whiskey making and what I've talked about on this podcast from earlier shows is whiskey takes time to make. Even though Americans have a little bit of a cheat code and a little bit of a shortcut, they don't have to wait normally, 3 years at a minimum for like Scotch whiskey to be called a Scotch whiskey. They can do it basically as it's made. Normally they make it within a year or two. But even if you're making straight whiskey, still that's only 2 years compared to 3 years in the minimum in Scotland. But if anybody could name me a great 3-year-old single malt that they're going after all the time, please let me know, because I'd be interesting to try it. So most age-stated stuff in the UK in particular, and Scotches, there's always that 8 to 10 year mark. That's when people tend to kind of bottle it and sell it and really enjoy their drams. But bourbon styles, because it can be made and it tends to get that flavour profile a lot quicker, 2, 3, 4 years, they tend to be enjoying that whiskey a lot earlier than others here in Scotland. So they can take advantage and they can be a bit more dynamic and a bit more fluid than the kind of Scotch market adapting to current market conditions. However, you're still 2, 3, 4 years down the road. It's not like a 6-month thing that you can pivot on when you want to take advantage of just a current trend. So whilst they are more flexible, they're still restricted by years and how you go and make things, etc. So I think the 4 areas that I was going to touch on about just what's driving all that growth is just premiumization, and that's with an S, unless you're American, then it's a Z, where consumers are kind of trading up and people are more interested in small batches, dynamic kind of styles of whiskey, and age-stated expressions, so that's straight style that everybody's looking after for, or single barrel stuff, so stuff that's only been aged in one cask and that's done. So a lot of people are drinking less, but they're wanting that little bit more kind of premium style. I'll encourage people to kind of look online for kind of university consumption. Not that that's a great way of indicating trend in general, but you see a lot more people aren't going out to clubs and bars and drinking excessively as much as they used to. People are wanting more experiences, a bit more kind of fun, and a bit more kind of things that they can enjoy. And the whiskey world is certainly one that's kind of continuing that trend. Global demand I spoke about. You've got the key areas of UK, Germany, Japan, and India now coming through, and we continue to see that kind of growing, I think, in the whiskey world, even with all the tariffs that Mr. Trump has imposed on everybody. I think we're still going to see growth in those regions for bourbon, and hopefully he will reduce those tariffs on other areas and we'll see that grow a bit more. But again, like whiskey making, as I've said, it takes 2-3 years to kind of adapt to that. So if he announces a good trade deal, even in the next 6 months, we won't take advantage of that for maybe another year. But even if these tariffs aren't that good, you've still got the same supply for the next 3-4 years, and then hoping maybe the next president comes in and maybe reduces those tariffs, or shows a bit more of an engagement to the global economy. Cocktail culture, another big one. Everybody loves cocktail these days. Just walk down your local high street, you'll still see loads of cocktail bars and loads of different styles of cocktails that people want. So people are wanting to try old-fashioned a lot more. That's always made with bourbons. And so people are just kind of naturally going for bourbon-style whiskey, because bourbon kind of opens its doors really easily to mixing and kind of being creative in the whiskey and bar drinking world, rather than Scotch. It's got two things going against it. One is a bit of a snobbery about blending it or mixing it in a bar. Unless it's a blend, people don't care as much. But if you're mixing a 10-12-year-old whiskey, people still kind of frown upon that. Whereas bourbon, because it's made in such a short time, people aren't as kind of turning their nose up at it or seeing that as an insult, particularly from a UK point of view. I'm not sure if that carries around the world. And I think the fourth one, which is quite a unique one for the whiskey world, and ones that I think we should continue to look at, is celebrities and all the different social media that's coming through that's getting into whiskey. So maybe people like myself promoting whiskey a bit more, getting people on it and talking about it, but also you're getting celebrities in it. So I guess the two famous ones in the US at the moment, you've got Matthew McConaughey. He's made his own whiskey with Wild Turkey. I think it's called the Long Branch or Long Mill or something like that. Someone will correct me, I'm sure. And that's normally about 40 quid, I think, in the UK. And he's got into whiskey and promoted it. And obviously Matthew McConaughey is a big name and he's getting involved. Bob Dylan then has collaborated with Heaven's Door and created a whiskey himself. That one is a straight whiskey, I think, as well. So, it's a bit more of a premium one, about £70. So if anybody has tried those, let me know. But I will be trying those in about a month's time on another show, just to kind of see what celebrities have been doing with whiskey. So it's not just a bourbon angle. I was going to see what all these different influences are getting in and kind of giving you the lowdown whether it's just nice or nonsense, shall we say, as a show. Another one is Hague Club from David Beckham. That was done a few years ago. So have a look at that one if you're interested in just celebrity stuff. But that kind of shows, celebrities coming in, really driving the market a bit more, and certainly coming in. It's not a new thing anymore. I think it's really driving and bringing people in to taste it. And then the India trade deal I kind of touched on there as well. That's kind of driving it as well. I mean, that was specifically one in the UK that's driving Scotch demand, but when people try good spirits from Scotland, they will naturally look for substitutes. And if American whiskey is, really, really good like it is, you're going to see people naturally looking for the American market and saying, well, I've liked this one, therefore I'll probably like that one as well. So that's kind of driving the growth. That's the ones I think is really pushing it, and some kind of stats behind that. But to give you some real world intel and some behind the scenes knowledge, I know a lot of people are starting to sell particular bourbon casks to investors now for barrels. And you might think, why they're doing that if they know all this demand's coming through. Well, twofold. One, they need the cash now to keep operational costs coming through. And two, they might have excess stock that they're just willing to sell and want to buy back at some point later down the road. Even if it's the same distillery, maybe people just want to get rid of their excess stock because they want to store it somewhere else. They might not have storage issues. And other people might just be interested in buying it off them because they think it's a good investment package. To give you an example of something that I've seen and I've been offered is kind of a whole pallet of whiskey. So by pallet normally means 6 casks. And that was an average cask price of about £2,500. And then what they have been doing is averaging or guaranteeing a 10% annual growth each year-on-year growth, and then buying it back after 5 years. So your ROI, 50%, 10% year-on-year. You put in 2.5K for 6, you're getting about 16K. You get back 25K, so you're making about 8K just over 5 years. Now, that is pretty good returns. If I could give you a guaranteed return of 10% and it's tax-free, you would probably, in this current climate, take my hand off for that. So that's quite a rare one that I've seen at the moment where people are doing guaranteed buybacks. And the reason they want to do a buyback is because they know it's good stock, but they might just want to kind of get through this kind of period where they just need some revenue for the distillery. Maybe they want to invest in a new pot still and they need the money coming in. Instead of borrowing from a bank, they can sell their own stock and then buy it back later on and bottle it later on and still sell it on. Because even though they might sell it to you and then buy it back more expensive down the road, they can still sell the bottles and then still make their money back, if they know it's good stuff and it's the things that they want to keep. So it's not like they're going to hemorrhage money and go bankrupt from that way. They've kind of kept their short-term costs low and they've kept revenue coming in, and then they'll buy it later on and keep the money coming through the door and still bottling really good stuff down the road. So doing a 10% year-on-year buyback is pretty phenomenal. I mean, if you're looking at just average stocks and shares, normally a good year on just the FTSE or the NASDAQ, you're probably looking at 7% or 7 to 8%. And that way you're like, wow, that's, I've had a average to good year. If you can guarantee 10% in this current climate, this is one that's now, really piquing investors' interest. If I'm just taking the UK as an example, savings rates 4, 5, 6% maybe if you're lucky, and that is considered as part of your earnings as well. So even though if I take it to the extreme, say 100,000, and you try and take 5%, you've got 5K coming in. That might be taxed as your income, and as people might be high income earners. You classify as high income earner now just as low as 45K these days, which is still a good salary, but it's not crazy to get into that bucket. You can get to that quite easily. And if you're taxed 20, 30, 40% on that income, you're just not really seeing that money come through to your pocket really at all. And it's stuff that you obviously then have to declare to the tax man. But if you're buying and selling whiskey, which is all capital gains free, well, it's a bit of a no-brainer really. Not only if you did the same 100 grand and it's gone up 10% year on year and you get your 50K back, let's just say, and then you don't have to pay any tax on it. Well, hang on a minute. Not only have you outperformed the market year on year on year, you're actually going to get a nice sweet deal at the end of it with zero tax to pay. And that's the way that people are really focused on and really going to benefit from it. Particularly in the UK now, we've got loads of additional taxes coming through. There's lots of fears from Rachel Reeves introducing more taxes to kind of high income earners. And then there's always the stories going around the press at the moment where we've got loads of millionaires and billionaires all leaving the UK because all of their assets are going to be taxed and so on and so forth. So it's a really big issue at the moment, particularly in the UK, to kind of one that's got people concerned about how am I ever going to increase my living standards if all of my property and all of my income is always taxed. And there's no way for me to really progress through it. Now, you could say that's a first world problem and for richer people problems. But if you're just a middle income family and you've got two people, earning even 30k a year, you've got combined household income of 60k, you might have some cash left over to go and buy a barrel of whiskey, because you can buy a barrel of whiskey for as little as 2,000. It's not one of these colossal mortgages where you're buying £150,000 pound house and you still need a £30,000 deposit. Saving £2,000 in a year is doable for people. Now, can everybody do it in a year? No. But could they do it in 2 years? Yes. And it's a lot shorter time horizon to kind of get your money back. Obviously, depending on what your own time horizon is and your risks and your kind of your wants, that's a whole different subject we can talk about another day. But if you've got these guaranteed bourbon buybacks, then stuff like that's really going to start piquing people's interest. And you don't need significant capital to get in. Yes, the example I gave, you had to buy 6, so, might not be as great as that. But I've seen stuff from Whistle Pig Distillery. You can buy a barrel of whiskey from them for £2,500. So it's not out of this world to get involved and get amongst it. So American whiskey, certainly on the rise, certainly a big trend coming through. But one final thing I was going to touch about is the importance of the American whiskey on Scotch as well. And you'll see a lot of the whiskies that you invest in, or when you go to talk to brokers, it's normally ex-bourbon barrels. And so we spoke about what bourbon is with all the characteristics, new charred oak, and it's got to be done 51% corn, and all non-filtering and flavorings, etc., etc. Because they're only made for one basically batch, they then sell those barrels to the Scotch industry. And then the Scotch industry then use those barrels again, maybe 2 or 3 times, and then they, recycle them, destroy them, and kind of it's used on for other things. So the American industry is actually really, really big. So for the Scotch industry to grow, it kind of needs the American industry to grow, so they can have their barrels and so they can use them for other things. But if you think about it the other way around, the reason why the American bourbon market is going to grow as well, the Scotch guys are growing aggressively around the world. We know from the India trade deal, there's going to be certainly an increase in the amount of whiskey sent to India and hopefully consumed in India from a Scotch point of view. If they want to suddenly produce more in Scotland, they're going to have to put that spirit in a barrel. And where are they going to get the barrels from? The US. If there's less barrels in the US, well, they're going to demand more. So even if they just make it just to sell it to the Scotch guys, they're going to have to, up their production of just barrel making. So that's a kind of a secondary kind of thing that you got to think about as well. These are all interlinked markets. Scotch is going to do well, and if Scotch is going to do well, they're going to want the barrels. Where are they going to get barrels from? America. Well, if America's going to do great, they're going to have more casks. They can sell it back to the Scotch industry, and the Scotch industry can continue to grow and sell their casks. So, they're very kind of interlinked in that regard. So it's quite an interesting thing to kind of look at, and I'd encourage everybody who's listening to kind of look at the relationship of American and Scotch whiskey, because it's a lot more than you think. It's not just everything's made in the UK and we're just doing it. There's a lot more kind of hidden relationships there that first meets the eye. So, just kind of concluding, what did I learn from my whiskey trip, if I want to say that? And what did I do? Well, I drank a lot of spirits. I had so many different bourbons out there. It was a really fun time when I was in all these different cities along the East Coast just to kind of try all things American. I have bought myself a Woodford Reserve special bottle. It's called a Special XO, and it's finished in cognac casks. I'm really excited to open that and try that in the next few weeks, which I will be opening on the show, and I'll give my own flavour profile. Not sure if I'll do a full bourbon show, but certainly I'm interested in opening that guy. And then I've tried all these kind of New York distilleries that have just been opening up. I've tried some Boston ones that have just opened up. So, give these other distilleries a chance. Don't just always go Kentucky. Yes, they're always probably slightly better just because they've got a little bit more heritage, a little bit more kind of prestige about them, and a bit more experience because they've been open a bit longer. But some of these guys that are producing bourbon, really, really good, really, really fun. And the great thing about bourbon is you can get in really, really cheaply. 20, 30 quid, you can buy a bottle off the shelf. Name me a single malt Scotch that can do that. You're probably going to shout Glenlivet or Glenfiddich 12 at me, which you probably can, just about, for like £25 reduced. But see what the American style is, because it's really good at blending, or mixing, shall I say, for creating those cocktails. It's really, really easy going. It's super good if you want to just have it on its own. And it's such a flexible spirit and useful spirit just to kind of try loads of different things with. Whereas the Scotch, I'm very stereotypical with it. I will open it, maybe have it with ice, water it down a little bit, and that's it. I enjoyed just that for what it is. But the American ones are a bit funner and a bit more interesting. But from an investor standpoint, they are growing rapidly. That 6% compounded annual growth rate for the next 5 years is pretty phenomenal. And that's 6% of 6 billion. So, the numbers are kind of crazy to get up there. So, if you're wanting to get American whiskey, please give it a try. It's really good fun. It's one of those things that you shouldn't turn up your nose at, because the Americans are really good at it now. And one that certainly is great for any investor wanting to kind of getting to diverse their portfolio if they're always looking at always looking at Scotch styles. And if you're really wanting to kind of push the boat, the ultimate whiskey, or the ultimate bourbon that everybody goes for, is Pappy Van Winkle. So have a look for that one if you ever get a chance to sample it in a bar. Normally they're really, really good. The 23-year-old is one of the most sought after ones. It's sold for like $200 when it first gets released, but it's about £1,000 by the time it gets here in the UK. So it's crazy price. I've tried the 10-year-old, and it was, I think, £25 for the shot, which is a crazy amount of money. But it is £750 bottle ish, or £500 bottle last time I knew. But it's really, really good, and it's really, really fun to drink. So if for those of you out there who are just wanting to know what is the bourbon to go for, try Pappy Van Winkle. If you're looking for one that's a bit more introductory, my favourite is Woodford Reserve Double Oaked. Really, really good. Or Woodford Reserve Rye. Gives you a really good different flavour profile than just the stereotypical Jim Beams or Jack Daniels from an American whiskey point of view, not a bourbon, as we spoke about. And then if you're looking to go just on that next level in between, Eagle Rare 10-year-old is one of my favourites. And also the Colonel Taylor small batch is another phenomenal one. Again, about £70 to £100. So have a look for those ones if you want to just try some whiskies. But if you want to invest them, have a look at current brokers out there who are offering these kind of guaranteed buybacks. They're really interesting at the moment. Some definite money out there to be made, I think. If not, have a look at distilleries' websites directly. Loads of people are wanting to kind of sell their young stock to just get their cash flow in, and I certainly think there's an opportunity out there in the market for everybody. Thank you for listening today. That's episode 2. Thought I'd talk all things American since I've been out there, and really looking forward to making my next show where who knows where we'll go. Will we talk about the celebrities, or will we open a cask and talk you through some flavour profiles of some whiskies that I've currently got in stock? Hope you all have a good evening, and talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye.